Hi, I'm Alec Grant, editor of Writing Philosophical Autoethnography. Excellent book, though I say so myself, which is on the Routledge stand at Bristol. I'm going to open the panel session by talking about the aims for the book, or my aims, then pass the baton to in sequence. Menah's going to go first, then Art, Mark, Christopher, Shelley, Julianne, and Georgina, 5 minutes apiece. 7 of the 12 esteemed chapter contributors. I'll keep us to time, prompting when necessary, and I'll leave in 20 minutes or so for a panel discussion with delegates and responding to chat box comments. Okay, a few years back, with a relatively recent master's degree in philosophy, I wanted to promote the idea of philosophical autoethnography. I've been around in autoethnography forever, well, a long time, hence the volume. Philosophy is a catalyst rather than a substitute for thinking. Doing philosophy amounts to thinking for yourself, especially around the issues of appearance and reality. For me, as an autoethnographer who writes stuff, it's about never being satisfied with how clearly and critical my writing is. It's about challenging my presuppositions and premises, and it's about thinking about the way I think. I'm obsessed about that. I argue a continuum from weak to strong sense philosophical autoethnography in chapter 1. Every piece of autoethnography is philosophical in proceeding from metaphysical, ontological, and epistemological positions. In simpler terms, all autoethnographic texts and performances contain assumptions about how the world works and what counts as being in it and knowing about it. However, it seems to me that weak sense philosophical autoethnography displays discursively restricted and culturally conventional as opposed to critical assumptions and premises. These are often deployed in unclear, confused, incoherent, and sometimes contradictory ways. I might piss a few people off here, I'm sorry. Strong sense philosophical autoethnography does the opposite. My position in the book is that by embracing philosophical autoethnography, practitioners of the craft will be in a better position to do the following: increase their discursive range and sophistication, improve on critical reflexivity by working against habitual human tendencies to respond to themselves and the world in insufficiently rigorous and curious ways. Combat naive realism, that is the tendency to assume that how the world is perceived through the senses is how the world actually is. They'll be wary of treating as timeless cultural concepts and ideas that may turn out to be ephemeral or short-lived. They'll be better able to challenge received, insufficiently scrutinized assumptions about self and culture, and better able to subject their ideological beliefs about the world, including the ideological basis of autoethnography, to critical scrutiny. So they'll be better able to manage equivocation and question begging. And in philosophy, equivocation refers to leaving concepts vaguely or inadequately defined and or treated in confused and contradictory ways. Question begging or arguing in a circle occurs when the premises of an argument assume rather than support or prove its truth or conclusion. Lastly, they'll be better able to selectively engage theories and concepts from a variety of philosophical positions in considering, questioning, and developing integrative perspectives on lived through or represented material. Now that's me done, so it's over to Menah.
Okay, thank you. My chapter examines the personal evolution of a critical Black girl feminist scholar activist identity and the accompanying philosophical explorations from a Black feminist and Black girl autoethnographic lens. In the introduction, I explore the challenge for Black women philosophers, beginning with the standard image of the thinker as a white marbled Greek man. And it's this image of a philosopher that's often found on the cover of books and conference programs and workshop flyers. And it's this image that Black women philosophers have struggled with. As a result, Black women philosophers are constantly pushing against the assumption that only white men can engage in philosophical discourse. As Catherine Ginn notes, I am constantly aware of and tirelessly or tiredly resisting controlling images and defining and redefining myself with and against stifling, intersecting, racialized, gendered, and classed expectations. Black women philosophers are exploring fundamental questions of identity. Who are we? How do we define ourselves? What is the evidence and justification for our identity? What are the responsibilities and obligations associated with our identity? Against this backdrop, I share my own journey of identity development, how I define myself, and my own sense of responsibilities. I draw on Patricia Hill Collins' work on Black feminist thought and Robin Boylan's work on Black girl autoethnography. Using journals that I have written since I was 8 years old as the data for my journey, I share how I developed a Black feminist consciousness. Over time, the Black feminist consciousness evolved into a critical Black feminist identity, and then to a critical Black girl feminist scholar activist identity. Using data from the personal journals and autobiographical reflections, my chapter documents the evolution of a critical Black girl feminist scholar activist identity through a Black feminist and a Black girl autoethnographic lens. This data can be found in my new book, Black Wild Girl, and I'll put that in the chat. The book is based on 45 years of journals since the age of 8 in my search to define myself without the constraints of whiteness and maleness, without the constraints of Eurocentric, androcentric, and homophobic biases. It's about promoting an Afrocentric feminist epistemology that challenges Eurocentric masculinist knowledge validation processes. The book Black Wild Girl includes journal excerpts that are part of this chapter. One short example is a poem I wrote in a Black poetry class as a first-year student. In that poem, I end with this statement: me, a woman, African descent, in America, I hate it. I was developing and articulating a Black girl identity and also understanding the reality of that identity in America. I minored in philosophy and African American studies in college and majored in literary studies. Much of my studies were about whiteness and maleness, with a bit of Blackness and womanness sprinkled in. Getting a law degree and a PhD in sociology continued the whiteness and maleness journey until I stumbled upon critical race feminism and Black feminism and the work of Patricia Hill Collins. On my dissertation, I discovered critical race feminism. Now, as a senior administrator and chief diversity officer and full professor, my identity has continued to evolve to be a revolutionary Black feminist scholar activist. It's allowed me to combine theory, method, and praxis. It's a concept I call theomythasis, and I share more in an article I published last year called A Black Womanist Theomythasis, Theory, Method, and Praxis for Revolutionary Revelation Writing. But let me conclude with a few sentences from my article inspired by Denise James, who proclaimed in her article, I am a Black feminist philosopher. I want to work on projects that will contribute to understanding the lived experiences of Black women and girls. I believe that philosophy done from a Black feminist standpoint can help to define, clarify, assess, and suggest changes in our social world that would greatly improve the lives of all people. This is both a political and philosophical commitment. And I am a critical Black girl feminist scholar activist. I write blog posts on issues of identity and humanity to empower the powerless, and it's my commitment to addressing and ensuring visibility to mitigate the politics of extinction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Menah. Thank you. And now it's Art.
Muted.
You need to unmute yourself, Art.
Good morning, everyone. First, a shout out to Alec Grant for rescuing this essay of mine from total obscurity. I actually published this piece 15 years ago in a communication journal, and I revised some of it, and Alec said he wanted to publish it, and I'm grateful for that. I want to also give a shout out to Ben Myers. Ben is an old friend of mine who inspired this piece after a session on father-son relationships. that was presented at one of the ICQI meetings a number of years ago. After the meeting, Ben accosted me in the hall and said, "What's wrong with you autoethnographers? You don't experience any happiness in your life. Every time I come to one of these sessions, it's about suffering." The sessions are amazing, but they're also terrifying. We had a long discussion over lunch about this, and Ben wrote me a note a couple weeks later and asked me if I would be on a session on autoethnographies of happiness the following year. And this piece was originally presented as a convention paper there, and the title is Suffering Happiness on autoethnography's ethical calling. And I think the piece, it's much too long for me to go into detail about everything that's in the piece. I hope you will get a chance to read it, but it's probably best summarized by an old joke I heard many years ago from Woody Allen. And Woody Allen's joke went something like this: to love is to suffer. To avoid suffering, one must not love. Then one suffers from not loving. Therefore, to love is to suffer, not to love is to suffer is to suffer. To be happy is to love, to be happy then is to suffer. But suffering makes one unhappy. Therefore, to be happy, one must love, or love to suffer, or suffer from too much happiness. That's the essence of the argument in my paper. I'll give you a few teasers. You might think of these as teasers, sort of like previews of coming attractions. I lean also somewhat on one of my favorite writers, the British psychoanalyst Adam Phillips. He says that happiness is all about what we want, but that the things we are most conscious of wanting get obscured by keener satisfactions that normally remain unconscious and beyond our awareness. What we really want is usually located in the realm of what is forbidden or repressed. And the question of whether a life is a happy one, of course, is also inextricably tied to narrative. A life is always incomplete until it ends, and every life ends in death. But we do not know the ending, neither the how nor the why. The quality of a life, then, is always contingent on future events which one cannot anticipate and over which one has no control. A life that moves forward can be full of surprises. And here is where things get messy. If a life is always in motion until one dies, how could one ever judge whether the life was happy until the life is over? If that is the case, then one can never judge the happiness of one's own life. And of course, there are many famous writers who have addressed this question of happiness, including Tolstoy and Anna Karenina. He declared, "Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Tolstoy believed that there was nothing profound to say about happily ever after, as my undergraduates used to scream, boring. In the conclusion of the paper, I summarized some of the implications for suffering happiness for autoethnography and autoethnography's ethical calling. And one of the things that I argue...
Sorry, Art. Can you start to wind it up now, please? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it there then, and I can, if anyone's interested, I can talk more in the afterward. Okay.
So sorry to, yeah. Okay,
that's all right.
Mark. It's your turn, Mark.
Thanks, Alec. Thanks for bringing us all together. My chapter is titled Thinking With, subtitled Paul Ricoeur Becomes Part of Mark Freeman. I'm going to read you just an excerpt from the abstract to provide something of the lay of the land. Despite my having been a student of the philosopher Paul Ricoeur in the 1980s, and despite being profoundly affected by his courses, his mentorship, and his thinking, I rarely refer to him in much of the work I currently do. This isn't because his impact has diminished. On the contrary, his thinking about time, narrative, and personal identity in particular was and remains so significant that it has become part of the very fabric, not only of my own thinking, but my own way of being in the world. There is no getting around this colonization, no getting around this inevitable plagiarism, no getting around the derivative nature of so much of our thinking and being, suffused as they are with the ideas and life worlds and souls of others. But this is hardly reason for lamentation. On the contrary, it's reason for celebration and immense gratitude. There is no thinking per se. There is only thinking with. So, what is it about this thinking with that I most want to highlight in the few minutes I have with you today? Well, it has to do with what Ricoeur and others have referred to as narrative identity. That is the identity that's tied to the stories we tell about ourselves and to ourselves as we navigate through our lives. A story. I was a student of the great philosopher Paul Ricoeur. I was intimidated by his presence and by the presence of all the would-be philosophers and theologians sitting beside me in his classes. I worked crazy hard to keep up with it all and did an audaciously deep dive not only into his work, but into the very fabric of the ideas he was exploring. When he was off in France, where he lived half of each year, I sent him some of my musings on memory, narrative, the process of development, and more. And he actually wrote back and expressed interest in what I was doing, especially the relationship between the backward gaze of narrative and the more forward-looking process of developmental self-formation. Heady stuff. All of this is part of my own story. All of this is part of me. Now, I hope I don't disappoint you all when I say so, but I am not Paul Ricoeur, nor did I ever want to be. I don't know that it's even right to say that I channeled him. There's no question, though, but that he, as writer and as person, did become a part of me. What's strange and perplexing about all this is that in a very real sense, he seems to have been there all along, well in advance of my actual encounter with him. Yes, I had felt, that's what I think, and know, and feel. There's an aspect of it that seems almost miraculous in a way, a gift, unsought and unbidden, one that gave me a whole world to inhabit. So thank you, my brother, for appearing in my life and for providing a language with which I might someday speak. I can only hope that you would find in what I've tried to do an apt and fitting instantiation of what you, yourself a beneficiary of those who came before, found to be worthy. How extraordinary and beautiful it is to find in the course of our meanderings and murmurations, voices that somehow manage to speak about what is most real and significant and true. How lucky and how utterly gratuitous. Isn't this the case for autoethnography, which for many has become nothing short of an unbidden deliverance, providing an orientation, a sensibility, and a language with which to speak the unspoken truths of our lives? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so Chris.
Hello, everybody. My piece in the book is called A Liminal Awakening. Like Mark, I've found over time that my great and memorable teachers, Mrs. Eaton, 7th grade English, Mrs. Gilchrist, 8th and 9th grade Latin, Mr. Joyner, American History, 10th grade, Mrs. Vaughn, Mythology, 11th grade, Bob Gilgullen, Socrates and Heidegger, Hazel Barnes, who taught existentialist literature, including Sartre, Nancy Hill, tragedy and comedy, Will Gravely, who taught Walker Percy, Wallace Clift, who taught Carl Jung, Roy Wood, who taught me about Goffman, ethnography, Buber, Levinas, Giddens, others, they have all become part of me. I think with them daily, though most of them has passed from this world. Perhaps it was her great passion, her spellbinding teaching, her clear and deep understanding that makes Hazel Barnes, translator of Sartre's Being and Nothingness, stand out. Surely there was something about the way she thought and taught that has stayed with me, influenced my being and teaching every day since I first met her at the University of Colorado in the spring of 1981. She was simply a brilliant, magnificent human being. Dr. Barnes held joint appointments in philosophy and classics at the University of Colorado until her retirement. She was equally versed in ancient Greek and Roman thought and in 19th and 20th century existentialism and phenomenology. She was an accomplished philosopher in her own right, and 20 years after we met, I got the job I currently hold at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I wrote to thank her. She responded by telling me her first teaching job was there, at what was then the Women's College of North Carolina in the 1940s. What goes around comes around, doesn't it? As a young man, I was quite taken by the ideas of the existentialist philosophers, and although they have since fallen out of fashion, they have never left me. In Dr. Barnes's existentialist literature class, we read across the spectrum of existentialist thought, from Dostoevsky to Tolstoy, to Kafka, to Kierkegaard, to Nietzsche, to Camus, to de Beauvoir, to Sartre, to Viktor Frankl, to Graham Greene, to Paul Tillich, to Walker Percy. As I said, I was kind of mesmerized by these ideas. There's something enticing about the creative passion invoked by Camus in understanding that this world is an opening to creative freedom, to possibility, to openness itself. I find myself mesmerized by the opportunity to hover on this threshold, to linger between not knowing and knowing, between past and present, between present and future, between anticipating and writing, between thinking and speaking into the air between us, between sending my voice across space and time and your response, between your saying and my listening, between what Levinas called the saying and the said, between what Buber called I and thou. It seems to me that the hyphens, the betwixt and betweens, the thresholds, these are the places that can open us up to the possibility of putting our creative energy out into the world. Now, the existentialist writers zeroed in on the raw fact of human finitude, which Art referred to, that we are limited and that we can surely rebel against our finitude, but we cannot fully escape it. But knowing this, we can craft a path for ourselves anyway. Still, we all know that at some moment, sooner or later, we'll find ourselves in direct confrontation with our end. The stark realization that whatever we face in this life, whatever we create, struggle with, overcome, whatever joys and sorrows we live through, all of it ends in the oblivion of death, is the jumping off place, the beginning of existentialist philosophy. Can we find possibility in this moment of stark realization and beyond it? Is there some way to wrest meaning out of an existence that appears to begin and end in oblivion and nothingness? For Camus, the answer lies in creative acts, in his case, writing. I have no quarrel with that. I found it there myself, more times than I care to count. For Percy, it's in the search itself. For Buber, it's that space between I and thou, the realm of holy sparks that's the opening of dialogue. For Kierkegaard and Tillich, it comes from a leap of faith, a kind of embracing of possibility beyond the possibility of possibility, or as Tillich puts it, in the God beyond the God that appears before the death, after the death of God, where we land in the courage to be in spite of the clear and present reality of non-being. I do not know much about faith, but I can follow Kierkegaard's methodology of doubt and see how it ends in a sort of leap beyond doubt into something. You can't hang out in doubt forever. And like Tillich, I can hold on to at least the idea of courage, or as he puts it later, I can dwell in ultimate concern. And as Buber puts it, I take my stand in relation. I'll just say at the end of the piece, in honor of Camus, I have a conversation with Sisyphus as he walks his rock back up the hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So it's Shelley now.
Great. Okay, great. It's great to be here with you all. Thank you. And I think that my chapter dovetails very nicely with Chris. I love existential phenomenology. I didn't realize it'd fallen out of favor. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so this is kind of I'm going to start with a little intro, and then my chapter is more of a kind of an exercise of applying kind of what I'm advocating for, which is supplementing autoethnography with existential phenomenology, because as autoethnography sort of has the self as the point of origin, existential phenomenology has the outside as that, and kind of how they entwine. So one of the best things I have done in my life so far is read everything Friedrich Nietzsche published during his. From June 2014 through February 2016, I studied Nietzsche's style, irony, humor, and his inspired use of clever and damning comparative examinations of historical and ongoing cultural practices. He announced in Twilight of the Idols in 1889 that to philosophize with a hammer is to call into question all the puzzle pieces of life that seemingly fall into place, making our worlds intelligible, familiar, and meaningful, and even apparently natural. I wrapped myself in the welcoming warmth of his nihilism, which many people seem to misconstrue by reducing it to its barest interpretive bones, translating the word from German to English as nothingness. Nietzsche was playful with his audience, making us work for understanding. The Will to Power in 1901 contains his most comprehensive definition of nihilism as the process by which the highest values devalue themselves. In his view, cultural entities possessing the most power and influence set about transvaluating other lower entities to reify their control, thus devaluing their own moral stature. Nietzsche's famous exemplar is the nihilism of Christianity through its psychosocial imposition of contrived human-made moral dictates. He mused, quote, supposing that nothing else is given as real, but our world of desires and passions, that we cannot sink or rise to any other reality, but just that of our impulses, for thinking is only a relation of these impulses to one another, end quote. His keen observations opened previously unknown existential doors for me. Today, I see him all the time in the world when powers collide with resistance, when people ask, why does it have to be this way? And from the tattoo of his face on my left thigh, gazing up at me or outward from my body, depending on how I'm positioned. And so what I'm kind of doing in this chapter is I'm reflecting on, I study protest, and I use existential phenomenology when I interview people that are engaged in protest. And so what I was reflecting on in this chapter was attending the Trans Day of Visibility in a couple years back. And so the Trans Day of Visibility is March 30th. And on this day, it's supposed to be a celebration of contributions of trans folks and accomplishments, and just kind of the celebrating the culture, the experience, and sharing that with the community. And so that's absolutely happened. And we had some great speeches, and then somehow it kind of turned into a rally almost. And I found myself kind of pulled into this protest that I wasn't really planning on doing. And then some chants kind of shifted from, from like Trans Lives Matter to Blue Lives Don't. And I felt kind of this like I felt really uncomfortable with my friend, because I just wasn't prepared that day to protest. And so I was kind of meditating on how I felt in that moment and kind of why I left. And another aspect of the chapter is sort of assessing how I'm feeling and what my takeaway is from that experience by talking with two of my friends. One friend was a speaker at the Trans Day of Visibility, and another friend is a local activist. And I felt so guilty when I left that. So I then went through and considered my story. It's just kind of a short story, but I thought about it through the lens of Edmund Husserl, founder of phenomenology, Martin Heidegger, arguably the founder of existentialism with Nietzsche, and then Jean-Paul Sartre. And I kind of located hammers, is what I call them, because I looked at how Nietzsche philosophizes with a hammer, and he wants to crack open the thinking, the natural attitude, the taken for granted. And so I really kind of just work through that story from each of these different perspectives and what they say, how you can bracket or approcher in phenomenology to try to bracket your assumptions. And so I kind of scrutinize my account and think about what it means to reflect with others, before writing autoethnography. So lots of layers there. I don't know how I'm on time. Is that good?
Yep, great, brilliant. Thanks, Shelley.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. Julianne seems to have disappeared.
Yes, I can't find her.
You can't find her. Oh my God.
She's offline.
Oh
She's
dear.
not-
Oh
she's
well.
not.
In which case, maybe she'll come back, but perhaps if we move on then to Georgina. Yeah.
Kia ora everybody, and thank you, Alec, for the invitation. And it's coming to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand, 10 minutes to 1 a.m. What am I doing? I'm up in the middle of the night again, working. Yeah, that's our life, isn't it? I wanted to share that I came to autoethnography. It really found me. I was teaching science through the medium of te reo Māori, and there weren't any other people that I could find doing that. So my doctoral thesis kind of depended on me writing about my own experience as a teacher. And then really my work, my research is. Shall I carry on?
No, carry on. Yeah, sorry. Julianne's back. So carry on. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I sort of combine philosophy of education with kaupapa Māori, and that's the basis on which I write. And the theme of my chapter in this lovely book is assimilation, because I come from a people who are indigenous to this country, but who have been really heavily encouraged, if not sort of forced, to assimilate. And really through telling the stories that I tell about my life and what it means to be Māori today is the only way to bring out what is different for Māori people. I love some of the themes that have come up already. Hyphens are very important to me because our experience as Indigenous people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is one in which it's no longer a pure situation, and any attempt to sort of think that we can go back to some kind of Indigenous world is clearly fantasy, really. So we live in a kind of a hyphenated situation with our colonizers. That's all I wanted to say at the moment.
Are you sure, Georgina? That was fantastic. I'm very sorry I interrupted you. I was just Julianne's.
Well, I sort of, yeah, I didn't plan on saying too much, and I figured being the last in the series, I might not have my full 5 minutes anyway.
Well,
but
you've actually got another 2 minutes if you won't.
Well, you know, I'd just be riffing really, and I don't think there's any point me trying to sort of recapitulate my book, but I am serious about my writing, and I think that the chapter that I've written in this book is one of the best pieces that I've written. So you know, hey, go and read it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic chapter. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome back, Julianne. So can you go now?
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry, there is a really bad storm, so if I disappear, it's not because I don't want to be here. I'm so honored, and it's also such a wonderful opportunity to be part of a book on that has the word philosophy in the title, or philosophical in the title. I remember as a first-generation college student sitting in my first philosophy class and thinking, wow, so this is the discipline of self-involved condescending men. What I'm ever going to do. There was a boy a couple months later that wanted to go out with me, and when I found out he was a philosophy major, I said, definitely not. And so I feel like I've grown, though, although it also is news to me that existential phenomenology is sort of on the outs. And maybe that makes sense given my journey into philosophy, because it is very much at the core of my understanding of my own lived experience. I am a narrative of performance scholar. It's how I understand others' lived experience in the world. This idea that existential phenomenology focuses on the flesh, blood, bones, and organs as we access what is real, true, powerful, and meaningful to us in the world. Sobchak tells us that it is that our bodies through existential phenomenology become the foundations of consciousness that are transformed by the world around me. And that all of our human tissues allow us to experience the world, to see, feel, hear, smell, touch, be felt, and they're also to be seen, to be touched, to be understood by others. And I live through a disabled body, a limping body, that over the course of my life, I have understood myself by what Rosemary Garland Thompson calls the able-bodied gaze of the world at me. My body is atypical, my body is jarring, and so I start to live my world in my earliest memories of seeing other people see me and navigating what it means for other people to see me. And so because of that, I move through the world very skeptical of people who have decided to make their lives work helping disabled bodies culturally assimilate and thrive. I don't like medical professionals. I dislike counselors at school focused on atypical embodied children because I have been alienated. I feel as though I've had to fight. Well, I don't feel, it's my lived reality that I have struggled and fought through that. And so what my whole chapter is that I have a son who lives with uncontrolled seizures. And I am married to an able-bodied, wonderful man who is the son of a school nurse and really thinks school nurses are wonderful people. And his mother's very nice. And so there is this idea how for the only time when I was first told I was in an interabled relationship, I laughed and I said, I don't even know what that means. But in those school conferences, I do know what that means. Because my lived existential phenomenological experience tells me these people do not have my son's best interest in mind because they are trying to manage their system, their space, without getting sued with him in. That's what they're doing. Where my husband Evan, who is a wonderful human being, is very much like, look at these people trying to help and accommodate and doing all they can. And so my chapter is us navigating that together when we just had the exact same meeting with the exact same person with extremely different reactions to those spaces. And due to that, we end up, I really am aware of how my body knows stigma. My body knows able-bodied bias and tightens and responds in ways my husband's does not, because he does not know, his body does not have that knowledge. And I think, and so in that way, that looking, that feeling my body tense, spasm, and respond to a culture, a movement, an understanding, I know that my husband doesn't, and how the story of our son in the school system changes between us as we experience the same moment very differently through our bodies. And I think the highlighted point is when we had a very young, wide-eyed nurse that was very excited to re-diagnose our son based on what she knew about seizures. And my husband, being the patient educator that he is, wanted to encourage her and help her understand. And I wanted her to be shut down and to stop immediately and to know she overstepped. And it was, and so that is what this goes on, of what existential phenomenological responses to the world mean to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julianne. Well, that was brilliant. Thank you, folks. Thanks everyone. Loved it. So now we have to open out to comments from and questions and comments in the chat box. So does anyone want to, and hopefully we'll start to discuss among ourselves too.
A question on the floor here.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chris. Hi. So I have a question for Georgina. So you talked about how the sort of, the suppression of Maori culture. But I was thinking, like if you think of the All Blacks, so if you don't know what the All Blacks, like the rugby team, and like probably the most famous New Zealand thing is, and the haka, and how, this is such a key part of Maori culture. So do you feel like it's sort of been appropriated by the people who've come to New Zealand, and what is that relationship with it? Because obviously it's so integral. There is obviously a big part of New Zealand, it's part of Maori culture. And like, what is that relationship, and is there understanding from these two different, the people that have come to New Zealand? So I didn't really explain that very well.
No, thank you for the question. And it's obviously, you're right. The All Black haka is one of the sort of icons of my country. And it's part of the branding, really. And this was very clear in the sort of neoliberal reshaping of our economy, the opening up of our economy to global capital for the needs of global capital, where Māori became part of brand New Zealand. That doesn't make it inauthentic, but there's clearly a real gap between what the official kind of national governmental aims are and those of Māori people themselves. So, my father was a native speaker. He grew up in his first house was a handmade shack with a dirt floor. So I've found all my life that, I don't know, something about the way I look, the way I speak, whatever, I've had to fight for my right to identify as Māori, and so my autoethnographical work has been a vehicle by which, it's only through those stories. You can't sort of put it in statistics or sort of analytical terms, but by telling stories about what it actually is like to be Māori is hopefully helpful to overcome that gap.
Menah and Beverly had a brief exchange. I think you've kind of talked it through with Beverly, where you finished that exchange on the chat box. Menah wrote philosophy as the discipline of the self-involved, condescending man. That was Julianne's comment. Is hilarious. I've personally, I'm an old white guy with a beard as emblematic of philosophy. I get that all the time, and I'm an old white guy with a beard. So I always want to apologize for being European, white, and old with a beard, and white, and with white hair,
Yes.
and writing my own wee attempts at philosophy. Fair dues.
Can I clarify something I said? This is Chris.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, so I said that existentialism had fallen out of fashion. That's in the American discipline of philosophy, but in autoethnography, it's kind of in other fields that has surged in the last few years. But when I was at the University of Colorado, there was a whole group of philosophers that were in the existentialism part of that, and that all got swept away in the late 1980s by old analytical white British men.
Yeah.
but we like the self-involved part without being condescending here in autoethnography, right?
Yeah. Okay. Art's got his hand up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Just one brief comment, since I didn't really get to the end of my paper, I may have left the wrong impression insofar as what I was really after in the paper was the idea of the ethical relation to the other of autoethnography. And I do make a call at the end for a much greater interest in how to read autoethnography and what kind of response might be made toward autoethnography, because most of us educated in the social sciences learned to read research reports, which were essentially a conduit to just deliver findings to audiences and not to evoke. And this is why the word evocation is so important, at least to me, in autoethnography, not to discount critical autoethnography, which has other objectives, but especially in considering issues like how to relate to other people's suffering. An autoethnography that fails to connect in such a way that people would be interested in, not only interested in, but want to do something about the suffering expressed autoethnographically. That is critical, and there's almost no attention to it in the literature. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. Evocation and connection.
So I have a question. So this is Jamie in the room in Bristol.
Hi, Jamie.
So yeah, my question is for you, Alec. So I've watched your interest in philosophy grow, and you do the masters, and then initiate this book, and it's wonderful to see the diverse an informed range of people that you've gathered with the different philosophical backgrounds and instruments and takes on things. And so I'm interested as to what you've learned, Alec, over the last 2 years, and particularly through engagement with the different contributors to the book, and how that's reshaped you, and if you feel pleased with what's emerged. I'm sure you do. But yeah, what's the journey's been like for you, and what you've learned through bringing this together?
Well, it's been great. I've loved it. It was a fabulous journey from start to finish. I've learned a lot from everyone, from all the people here, and the 5 or so people that contribute to the book that aren't part of the panel today. I started off with just an idea. I talked to Tony Adams about doing a special issue for the Journal of Autoethnography, and on the idea of philosophical autoethnography, and that was just after I'd finished my MA in philosophy, and it was Tony that really encouraged me to think of a book for the Writing Live series, and thanks to Tony and Art and Carolyn for accepting the idea. It's been really good. I've learned a lot, but mainly about, which I knew about already, but not in such great story depth. Continental philosophy from the Western tradition. I think one of the things that I still regret, and I mentioned this in the last chapter, the concluding comments chapter, was that I'm thinking about J. Garfield and people like that who argue that Western philosophy is hegemonic. It doesn't leave space, and it's also colonialist and imperialist. It doesn't leave space for Eastern philosophy, non-Western philosophical traditions. And so I started to wonder about what a Buddhist philosophy, philosophical autoethnography would look like, given that Buddhism, not just Buddhism, but Eastern philosophy, is premised on the no self idea, and the idea of getting rid of selves, or the uselessness of the self construct. I'm thinking about David Hume now, and J. Garfield too, and a few other people, Indian philosophers, who argue against selfhood in favor of personhood. and that can extend to non-human animals, etc. So what would autoethnography look like? And this is still a question for me, without selves in it, a no self autoethnography, or an autoethnography of personhood. So I don't think Eastern philosophy is represented at all sufficiently in the book. Indigenous philosophy is. Georgina, well, specifically Georgina's indigenous Maori philosophy is represented, but you know, the book kind of flows on the Western, mainly, not exclusively, continental tradition. But it's been a great learning experience. In fact, I vowed today I must read this book again. I must read all the chapters again. And I loved it when I was editing it and reading the chapters, but I haven't picked it up for a while. I've been involved in other things, so that's what I'm going to do, bedtime reading on my pile. Is that an answer to your question, Jamie?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Alec. Yeah. Sounds like you've got another book coming soon as well.
I have. I've got a book on top of this book. If I can just a quick plug. It's called Resisting Cultural Narrative Entrapment in Autoethnography. It's a sole written book. Thank you very much. And thanks to Mark for, doing a forward for me. Cheers.
Quick, can I offer a quick comment?
Yeah, go on then, Mark.
In some ways, it's a response to what you have said, Alec, as well as to art. In terms of the no self idea, I heartily recommend some of the work of Simone Weil, who has this very curious wish, and her wish is to be able to see the world as if she wasn't there.
Yeah.
Now, there's an element of self-involvement in her own writing, but she's actually a really good example of somebody who kind of moves into the no self realm, as is Iris Murdoch.
And
in response to art, I guess I'll offer a suggestion, maybe, which is not to say I'm volunteering for anything, but I think it would be interesting to do some work, whether in the form of a symposium or a book or whatever, that could be called something like Thinking Otherwise, about the auto of autoethnography, right? I mean, it's another way of speaking to the ethical issue that you raised, and another way of highlighting, in a sense, the place of the other in the formation of self and in just the way we experience the world. And so something for us to think about.
I was going to chip in, not necessarily on what you were just speaking about, but I did want to thank Alec for inviting me. I think I came to like an autoethnographic conference a few years ago and spoke about a project that I was just starting at the time with the journals. And I must have mentioned that I minored in philosophy, maybe, I don't know. But when I got the invitation to write, I thought, well, I haven't really thought philosophically and the way that philosophers have to think as a discipline since I was minoring in it as an undergrad. And so I found it quite intellectually fulfilling because I have a law degree and a PhD in sociology, and I have a master's in literature. So I consider myself an interdisciplinary scholar with a focus on spirituality and womanist thought, but not necessarily a philosopher. And so trying to come at the chapter from not only a philosophical standpoint, but from the standpoint of Black women philosophers and Black women's philosophical thinking. And so it was like a whole new research project because that's not really my area of scholarship per se. It's on race, class, and gender and education and experiences of marginalized people. And so to kind of get in a new headspace and actually research Black women philosophers and their struggle to define themselves, and the pushback to the comment about how, like, who's your guy? When Black women were in philosophy classes, it's like, who's your guy? Like, who's the philosopher that you're modeling? And, almost always, then, you're an English, British, Russian kind of philosopher that needs to be your guy. And so I think just being able to challenge so much of the dominant hegemonic thinking and the colonistic nature of philosophy, but also many disciplines. And I connected to, when I was studying sociology, I was reading a bunch of white male sociologists. And it wasn't until my dissertation advisor, who was the only Black woman in the department, said, well, have you read Patricia Hill Collins? I was like, who's she? And so much of our training, or at least my training, from law school, from all the disciplines I've studied, has been dominated by a white male hegemonic ideology and this almost separate responsibility of searching for the other. Okay, where are the women of color? Where are the people of color? Where's the indigenous thought? Where's the X? Where's the other that's not included? And so, Alec, I just appreciate you reaching out to me to kind of challenge me to go back into, I did love philosophy as an undergrad, but it was, I think, because it was coupled with a minor in African American studies. So at the same time, I was exploring what it meant to be Black and also a woman, and to think critically about different issues and to have words and lenses and ways of thinking. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Menah. Thank you. Yeah. I'll move on to Laura's has got her hand up. I think it's Laura's or yeah. But I just want to, Georgina's written, Western thinking is so dominant that we are all, as women, indigenous, etc., always reading against it. Yep. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I'm sure we all get that. I hope we do.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Alec. My question is to Art. When you mentioned evocation is important, I thought of W.E.B. Du Bois's work, Souls of Black Folk. And then I thought about Fanon. But I wonder if you may please speak more about how your thoughts on evocation and where I could go. Thank you.
Yeah, well, most of my thoughts in evocation are in the book on evocative autoethnography that I did with Carolyn and a series of other published works. But I'm very intrigued by this question of because so many of the critics of autoethnography, and usually the critics of autoethnography have never tried to do any autoethnography or don't even read it with anything other than a critical eye. But putting that aside, in my own discipline of communication, I figured out at a fairly young age that working within that discipline was never going to be for me. There were too many issues of power and tradition that were standing in the way of that. And although I didn't recognize that evocation was the main driving force for the rest of my academic life, I did realize that the world was bigger than my discipline, the world of ideas, thoughts, contributions, etc. So when I got together with Carolyn in 1990, we didn't think in a disciplinary way. And I think that's one of the things that's hurt a lot of people insofar as their own imagination, their own inspiration, because I think it's inspiration. I feel very fortunate because I was able to survive almost 50 years in a academic world. I don't know if that will ever be repeated again, because the world is so different now than the world that I occupy. And I worry about that. But in terms of your direct question about evocation, the best thing I could recommend at this point is put it into Google Scholar. The word evocation, the disciplines of evocation, and you'll turn up a lot of interesting things. And I think Mark's comments about the location of the work of Levinas and so many others in alerting us to, or at least trying to, the importance of the other. That's where it starts. And so the critique of autoethnography, that it's self-indulged and I kind of thing. I just think that there's a pretty simple response to that. If we're going to actually educate people to do this kind of work, or the more art science that Mark Freeman has talked so wonderfully about, there has to be a different kind of education, a different kind of reading program, a different kind of exercise of writing. It always felt absurd to me that in graduate school, the first thing you learned was publish or perish. One of the first things you learned was publish or perish. And you had to publish, which meant at that time you had to write. And yet there were no writing courses in the curriculum.
Yeah.
It's still a bit like that.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
I've used evocative or autoethnography for like 4 or 5 years, and it was the part of my master's thesis and now my PhD. But I'm still wondering where else I can go afterwards. Like where else can I look in terms of suffering? And that's, I think of Fanon, as I say, but then something more contemporary, I'm a little bit more stuck with.
Annalise writes, or are we picking up on Georgina's Western thinking is so dominant that we're all, as women, indigenous, etc., always reading against it? Annalise writes, or are we just looking for a place where we can fit and be heard? This means a place yet to be written. Yeah, we were talking about that, Annalise, on Sunday, weren't we? Is she there? Do you want to say it? Do you want to?
Guys, I don't mean to be difficult, but I think we're coming to time.
Oh, are we? Okay, sorry. Okay, well, that's been fun. Thank you very much. Fantastic, folks. Brilliant. Cheers.